Hello everybody and welcome to today's video. I am doing a little bit of a review for 6 books that I've recently read and really want to share about. They're all within the genre of thrillers and horrors, and some of them a mixture of those and maybe some other things thrown into the cauldron, but I thought it would make a good kind of themed review video, and I've got 6 of these books to talk about. So without any further ado, let's get into it. The first of these books is definitely more of a YA kind of thriller horror vibe, and I listened to this one via audiobook, and this is called The Girls Are Never Gone by Sarah Glenn Marsh, and I ended up giving it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. So this book is described as being Sadie meets The Conjuring, and we're following 17-year-old podcaster Dare, who takes an internship in a haunted house and finds herself in a life or death struggle against an evil spirit. So a little bit more detail. Dare Chase doesn't believe in ghosts. Privately, she's a supernatural skeptic, but publicly, she's keeping her doubts to herself because she's the voice of Attachments, her brand new paranormal investigation podcast, and she needs her ghost-loving listeners to tune in. That's what brings her to Arrington Estate. This was honestly such a thoroughly enjoyable story. It was super entertaining, really good representation for invisible disabilities and queer rep as well. I really liked our main character Dare and kind of this inner battle she had with what she puts out into the public, yet her own actual beliefs, and how she kind of deals with that when faced with supernatural entities when she comes to this haunted house. I had a great time listening to this in particular, and I really enjoyed unraveling the mystery around this haunted house and the girls that wound up dead and missing in and around its lake. I feel like the writing style that the author flourished in really captured the eerie and unsettling atmosphere of a ghost story just in general perfectly, but it also blended a healthy dose of lightheartedness with the cute medical assistant dog that we had called Waffles, and the gentle unfolding of feelings in Dare's and Quinn's relationship. I would have liked to have seen more of the friendship dynamic with the Prior to and Holly as a little trio, as I felt like that was more of a told not shown sort of dynamic, and I really feel like the story could have benefited from being more immersed in their relationship as a trio. And we could have got a little bit more into Holly's headspace, a little bit more in regards to what was going on and how she was being affected as well. I was a little hazy on the whole internship and the story that was given for them to all be there in the first place. I think I may have just missed that crucial bit when I was listening to it via audio, but nevertheless this was a really solid story, and I definitely recommend it if you're interested in a YA thriller ghost story. Following on, we have a more kind of historical thriller. It's one that I definitely didn't have any prior thoughts really going into it, and this is The Quiet Librarian by Alan Eskews, which I gave a 4.5 out of 5 stars. And once again, I listened to this via audiobook. So after the murder of her best friend, a librarian's search for answers leads back to her own dark secrets in this sweeping novel about a woman transformed by war, family, vengeance and love. And more specifically, we're following our protagonist Hannah Babbitt, who is a quiet middle-aged librarian in Minnesota who wants nothing more than to just be left alone and to get on with her quiet existence. But when a detective arrives with the news that her best friend has been murdered, Hannah knows that something evil has come for her, a dark remnant of the past she and her friend had shared. As I mentioned previously, before getting into the depth of the synopsis for this story, I didn't really know what I was expecting going into this one, but this turned out to be such a worthwhile and moving story for me to read, growing from a real devastating war that saw the Muslims of Bosnia prosecuted for their faith, Serbians setting out to ethnically cleanse the land. It's a piece of history that I hadn't had any education on prior to this, and despite this story itself being fictional, the context it draws from left me with information that I hadn't previously had, and a thirst to learn a little bit more about this war. What Nura encountered was brutal and traumatic, but I never felt like the author put these details into the story just because, for that trauma dump, that fear factor. It all felt like it truly captured some of the horrific experience that the Bosniaks endured, without kind of using the trauma for entertainment. It didn't have that feel to it, from my perspective at least. Present day Nura, who we know as Hannah, her storyline was steeped in mystery, and it had more of a slower unfolding of action than the life of young Nura. But having that back and forth between timelines, I found personally really helped to put into place and perspective how events that had transpired previously in the younger life affected the present moment, and kind of how Hannah presented herself and how she knew so much of war and self-defense as well, because she was whipping out these skills that you wouldn't expect for a quiet middle-aged librarian, right? So that was really well written. I think that dual timeline perspective. Don't get me wrong, this was a hard book. It had devastating war crimes and some really awful events like on the page. Again, not in a way that felt like trauma just to be there, but it was handled really well. We had an exciting and engaging story at the heart of everything, with a main character that I was rooting for, and it depicts a genocide I had no information on before, yet it's frighteningly only happened within the last 30 years or so. So that definitely put things into perspective for me. Okay, moving on to the next book, which is more straight up horror, I would say. And it's again kind of like a sentient haunting island house kind of story, and this is Hemlock Island by Kelly Armstrong, which I gave a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I had plans to have this be one of the first books for a book group that I'm starting at work. Unfortunately we couldn't get hold of many copies, so I had to choose a different book, which was fine, but nevertheless, Hemlock Island by Kelly Armstrong. We're following Lainey, who's been renting her island to strangers to kind of make ends meet and pay off bills without fully letting go of the one place that she finds joy and solace after a little bit of a hard time with the death of her sister and a divorce, and a sudden parental responsibility of looking after her younger niece. However, the invasion of her privacy is giving her panic attacks. She's clearly not dealing well with people invading her private space, and it ramps up to further degrees when things are turning up on the island and the home broken, disturbed, and just completely disrespected. And there's quite a sinister and eerie tone to it all as well, because she's now had reports and complaints from renters fleeing the island and has found blood in a wardrobe that looks like someone had tried to claw their way out and failed. This truly was a very Moorish story that was really easy to fall into step with and devour large chunks of it at a time. And it really helped that the characters were really memorable as well, for better or for worse. In fact, strange thing, but I didn't realise how much it was possible to care for a character that didn't really show themselves much on the page. Like, they were more of like a very side character that main characters were just talking about in passing, and really I cared for them. Tone for the large part of this book, it kind of reminded me of like Scooby-Doo mysteries. It felt super light-hearted, but like there was something kind of just lurking on the edge of the page, and when that thing came, it was sudden, sharp, and super effective. I will say in this story, it does feel like there were some components that could have been edited out, mainly the overuse of certain formulas. For example, Lainey always being the main person. I know she's our main character, but always being the main person to find something and then deciding, oh, I'm not going to learn from my previous 3 attempts at doing this and something going bad. I'm still going to bulldoze ahead and look at it myself and run away from any kind of help that's nearby just to investigate for myself, just because I have a feeling and I have to, and then getting into trouble. Like, learn from your mistakes and adapt and do better. She's got a niece that's probably following her lead and, you know, is easily influenced, and she just keeps doing the same mistakes. So that was one thing that was just infuriating, and I feel like could have been adapted and edited a little bit better so that characters shared maybe who was going after certain things. I don't know, it probably made sense in like a plot point way, but at the same time it was just frustrating to read. But nevertheless, it was a super enjoyable story. It gave that spooky haunted house, old entity lurking just behind your eyesight kind of horror that I really enjoy. Definitely recommend. Okay, we are moving on to the fourth book. This one is another YA thriller horror, I would say, and it's called How to Survive a Slasher by Justine Picella Winners, and I gave this one a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I feel like it's a relatively new release because I'd seen it come up as an ebook through my library app, and it just suddenly appeared, so I assume it's relatively new. But this is described to be a combination of You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight meets Scream, that turns classic horror tropes on their heads. Following CJ, and basically they live in this town that is renowned for its slasher fest, and it was inspired by events that happened many years ago that affected their father, who was the sole survivor of a slasher massacre at a summer camp. He was one of the camp counselors, and he managed to survive, have children, have a family, and then he got murdered by a copycat killer who was very close to the original Wolfman, who's a masked villain in this. So it's kind of a bit dark that the town capitalizes off of these killings and celebrates it in that way, especially knowing that the family still live in this town, and they live there for many reasons. It's the resting place of the dad. It holds a lot of memories, a lot of trauma, and probably that's got a difficult detachment for them, but it's also just still their home. Yes, things happen, unsafe things happened, but I guess unsafe things can happen anywhere, and they don't want to move, which is okay within the character's right. Anyway, enough for the background of the story. This had such a fast pace that I found really enjoyable. I felt like I was whizzing through this. The themes and style all gave the quality of like a Goosebumps story, which was a fun aspect. It did feel a touch overlong, which made the story feel a little bit too repetitive in some instances, especially once we got into the flow of like the plot's formula. However, in saying that, we had some great characters to fall back on, which I really didn't want to be apart from, so I wasn't really mad about the fact that it was a longer book than it needed to be. Speaking of characters, I really loved the family dynamic that we got, especially how badass CJ's mum was and how she raised the family on her own after the murder of the dad. She seemed like such a force to be reckoned with and was clearly an inspiration for all 4 siblings. I also really like Sebas. He was a fantastic Plottermore character, if you will, which is a dynamic I had never heard before. At least I don't think I had, but I feel like this story definitely highlighted some more tropes that I wasn't familiar with, and it really elevated the story for me in that sense. It's also just made me more aware of tropes as a consumer of horror content specifically, which is a similar feeling to how I felt when I read and enjoyed Young Gothic by M.A. Bennett. Just going to sideline a little bit because perhaps a more slightly obscure thing to comment on, but I really appreciated the fourth wall breaking that the author did for our characters within the titles of the chapters. It was humorous and it poked a little bit of fun at this kind of feeling like a story within a story, and how it was following the more stereotypical tropes of a horror flick. We also had this side character called Nadia to help solidify that and point out these horror kind of archetypes in terms of the story unfolding as a plot, which is really entertaining because of course we are literally reading a novel, but to the characters in the book it wasn't. It was all very meta, and I really liked how they did that. It made me chuckle, and I feel like it was done quite cleverly but also just lightheartedly as well. I really love CJ's conversations on the gender fluidity as a bisexual person that presents slightly more femme, and I just felt like it resonated with me a bit more than I was expecting it to, and I found so many quotable passages that I was just like, yep, highlight that, screenshot that, favorite that, everything just kind of slotted in place a bit perfectly actually. So let's talk plot twists real quick. I worked out a major emotionally driven twist just for another emotionally driven twist to come around and slap me in the face, nearly quite literally in reference to a particular scene, and then another fastly approaching twist on the heels of that one. I was honestly floored, and it made up for the fact that I'd already guessed the previous twist. or I guess red herring, really, like looking back on it. But it just when you think you've got it worked out, there's more. So yeah, I liked that this story just really kept me guessing. I had such a great time reading it. It was a fantastic experience, and I highly recommend. I think even if you don't really read YA, you will really enjoy this. Okay, moving on to a very adult horror book now, and it is very adult. Please do not read this if you're not of age. This is Manhunt by Gretchen Felker Martin, and I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. And it's described to be the last man meets the girl with all the gifts. It's a post-apocalyptic novel that follows trans women and trans men on a grotesque journey of survival. This outbreak of a testosterone-infused disease breaks out and turns people with high levels of testosterone in them into feral men, and all they do is go around sexually assaulting people and killing. It's an extreme, it's a very on the nose commentary, but it's in an extreme sense, and it was very interesting and very dark. It was intense, made especially so with the immersive reading of audio and physical, which is how I read it. The concept was, for me, like a fresh take on your classic dystopian trope, but jacked up to 100. I loved the own voices, trans centrality to the story. The detail is definitely not for the faint of heart. The author excels in descriptions that make you feel as if you should be hiding in the surrounding desolation or the shrubbery, and the sex scenes were super graphic, bringing the words to life in very vivid descriptions. Manhunt, it took me through a wave of emotions, and I felt my heart racing for Fran and Beth and Robbie, who are our main characters. So by day or by night, really, they are harvesting feral men organs to extract things to create estrogen for them to take so that they don't turn into the feral men, right? Completely chaotic. They've lost all sense of reason and understanding. They are the basis primal instinctual animal, and it's awful. So obviously they don't want that to happen, and it was a ride. I think I probably didn't give it a full 5 stars just because of the overuse of sex. Like, it's a weird thing to say because it is extreme in all of its senses, but I just didn't expect to have the level that we had. Because in my head, this sounds so weird, when I think of post-apocalyptic stories, which, to be fair, and this is probably why I haven't read or like watched a lot of those, I don't think sex is going to be the most important thing on your mind, right? But then with this, it just felt so overdone that it was jarring to the story. I don't know if that makes any sense. Anyway, in saying that, I must compliment the different kinds of sex. I know I feel like I'm going on and on about sex now, but the different kinds that was introduced in this story. The fast and heavy desperation of people that didn't think they would see the next day. There was the more beautiful oneness of a couple in love. There were explorations of kink culture. You had the type where a character just craved the simple gratification of a satisfying orgasm, as well as one particular character that comes to mind that indulged in the more self-deprecating, shunned sex, to name a few examples. So I felt like it was very well written and very thought-provoking, but it just also felt overused. Anyway, all that aside, this was a truly gripping story at the heart of it. It was full of the extreme possibilities of the dangerous combination of feral men and all-out turf war, because there are people in this world that are still against transness and want to oppose it in all its ways. And I'm thinking, really? There are other things that really require your attention and you're still battling this? Like, what is... Anyway, it was woven together in such an entertaining, gory, yet very moving way, full of human connection at its heart, and I definitely recommend it because it was such an experience. Okay, we are moving on to our last book, which is another YA thriller with definite elements of supernatural horror vibes, and this is The Executioners 3, which I actually have a copy of somewhere. I just realised it's right behind me, so I've just like shimmied over a little bit. This is by Susan Dennard. Denard, I still need to figure out how to pronounce the surname, so I do apologise. And I gave this one a 5 out of 5 stars. We are following Freddie Geller, who didn't mean to get half the rival high school arrested. She'd simply heard shrieks coming from the woods, so she'd called the cops, and it turned out it was just kids partying in the woods, doing some underage drinking and getting up to shenanigans. Except the next day, a body is found, and while the local sheriff might be calling it a suicide, Freddie's instincts tell her otherwise. Kindly sent to me by the good folks at Black Crow PR, so very many thanks to them. I was on the book tour for it as well, so I gave some thoughts and feelings at the end of that. But I thought I wanted to kind of come on here and do a little bit of a review for it too. So this is my first book by this author. I came into it with some trepidation because I know that her Truth Witch series and the Luminaries series are so beloved, and I had a little bit of like overhype in my head where I worried that I wouldn't enjoy anything, but those feelings, it didn't matter, because the author's writing deserves all the acclaim, all the excitement. It was such an enjoyable story, and I'm so glad to finally have sampled one of this author's works. From the writing of the characters to the giddy romance of first love to the mysterious and murderous plot, everything had me hooked and gave me that addictive rush that only good storytelling can give me. It's the hit I crave, and it's the hit I certainly got. Despite personally being a baby and a toddler in the 90s, I could feel the nostalgia of the setting and thoroughly appreciated the references to pop culture, such as, you know, particular boy bands and TV shows of the time. It just made for a really well-rounded protagonist in Freddie, our main character, because with her world filled out, she in turn felt multidimensional and solid. She was nerdy, witty, a little bit weird, and honestly was just a delight to read about. I could totally see how her determination though to seek all the answers would be really annoying at times, but it kind of just added to a more unique character, and it was also quite an endearing trait which made for some beautiful mirroring dynamics to her dad, which was also a complex relationship that was touched on a little bit throughout the story. The relationships that Freddie had were brilliant, from the chilled and easy existence that she had with her mum and stepdad to the shared fangirling of boy bands and first crushes she connected with Divya, her best friend, over, to the love-hate prank rivalry she had with the private school and the romance she found in Theo. All of these relationships once again added to layers of the story that I very much appreciated. The story itself was fantastic. During a prank rivalry, Freddie basically comes across a cursed poem that stems back to a disgruntled and poorly treated blacksmith whose ancestors are wanting to get payback on the rich founder folk of the town. That, combined with the supernatural element of this cursed poem, really added a richer layer to the history of this cozy kind of small town thriller. Don't get me wrong, there was nothing cozy about the murders. It was pretty gory, pretty abrupt, but the whole ambience this had screamed autumnal cozy vibes. With that being said, I had a fantastic time reading The Executioners 3. I'm pretty sure I have a copy of The Luminaries looking right at me on my shelves, so I shall hope to get to that relatively soon. And that, my friends, wraps up these 6 book reviews that I wanted to talk to you about today, focusing on the thrillers and the horrors that I've been reading recently. Do let me know if you've read any of these books that I've mentioned here today, and if you have any recommendations about books that you think I might enjoy based off what I've just chatted about, I would love to know. Thank you so much for watching, and I shall catch you in another video soon. Bye.